Aria was still fast asleep under about 3 fluffy blankets to keep her cozy and warm. Flip and Flop stretched and purred and decided it was time to get up. Aria was in the middle of a deep sleep when she suddenly woke up to see one pair of deep blue eyes and one pair of glistening golden eyes looking back at her as they continued to purr and purr. "Is it morning already?" Aria said as she sleepily rolled out of bed. Aria put on her dressing gown and slippers and opened the curtains. "How beautiful," Aria said as she looked at the view. She grabbed her coat and went running outside into her spiky tree garden. The palms glistened and her home sparkled. Winter had arrived. There was snow at the beach house. Icicles hung down all around the windowsills and from the roof like swords made of glass. The beach was covered in a thick blanket of snow. Aria didn't see snow at the beach house very often, so she was mesmerized by what she saw. The clouds were low, misty and light as they gently rolled by. As the sun rose up somewhere far behind them, the light shone out across the water and the sea looked like liquid silver. Aria put her hands up to shade her eyes as it was so bright, yet so stunning she didn't want to miss it. She put on her fluffy boots and ran down the beach to look at all the snow. The air felt clearer and fresher than ever before, making each breath feel both exhilarating and awakening. As she looked at the clouds, 2 swans flew low across the sea. Aria watched them closely. Their wings made a loud and powerful beat as they flew together so perfectly in time. Their white wings and streamlined shape against the morning silver light was exquisite. "What a day to wake up to," Aria said to herself. As Aria turned to walk back to the beach house, Flip and Flop were carefully jumping into Aria's footprints in the snow, making their way to join her. Aria smiled as she walked back to the beach house, making some new footprints so they had some more steps to have fun with. As Aria walked back through her spiky tree garden, she heard a funny beep-beep sound, and Paradise flew out into the silvery morning sky. His scarlet feathers looked deep and rich against this snow scene. As for the sound, this was Paradise's new noise. It was his version of Orbeez horn, Aria's little yellow car. Aria took off her boots and decided to make breakfast. She made a warm porridge with pieces of almonds, cinnamon, coconut, dried cranberries, and oat milk. Flip and Flop came running into the kitchen to keep warm by Aria's feet. Aria put her porridge in a bowl and made a hot chocolate with nutmeg and went over to melt into the sofa and enjoy her breakfast. Aria noticed some movement in the newspapers next to the fireplace. She got up to look a little closer, and the newspapers moved some more, and out popped a lovely little green head. It was Harold. He had made a den for himself under the papers and was keeping warm. Aria scooped up her little tortoise into her arms and walked over to the sofa. There was a lovely fluffy blanket and she created a little space and put Harold down. He loved this and quickly burrowed himself into it and rested next to Aria as she finished the rest of her breakfast. Aria did some tidying and got dressed, ready to face the day. There was a knock at the door. Aria went to open it, but it was wedged from all the snow. There was a rummaging of noises and a giggle from outside. Aria waited, and then tried to open the door again. She needn't have pushed so hard, as the door opened really easily, and Aria walked straight into River. "Oh," Aria said with embarrassed surprise. River was speechless and just laughed. Aria laughed too. "Morning," River said as he gestured to Aria to go back inside, and they closed the door to keep warm. "It's cold, Aria. Have you got enough firewood?" River asked. No, not really," Aria replied. "Well, we'd better go and get you some," River said while jumping up and down to get warm. Aria got changed and put on her favourite winter coat. There was always something rather fun about wearing different clothes for different seasons. Ready? River asked. Yes, Arya said, and they went outside. Orby was covered in snow and looked like a giant snowball. Hey, Orby, Arya said. Hello, sunshine, River said as Orby's yellow radiance began to appear. He looked even more yellow than usual against the white. River got out the roof rack and started to attach it to the car. Arya jumped in and started the engine to get him warmed up. There's ice in here too, Arya said as she started scraping it off the inside of the windscreen. River laughed. Arya and River got some blankets from the beach house to keep them warm in the car. Okay, let's go, Arya said. Orby was excellent at driving in the snow, but he didn't have much heating, so it was a little cold. Arya had to wind the window down to stop the glass from fogging up, so it certainly was refreshing. I think it's colder in Orby than it is outside, River said as he sank into his blanket some more. I think you might be right, Arya laughed. Behind the beach house was a large forest. There was a narrow track road that went through it, and because of the trees, it had been given a little shelter from the snow. Paradise flew alongside as they went. The track led to a lovely wooden ranch deep inside the forest. There was smoke coming out of the chimney pots, giving a lovely smell of wood smoke. Arya turned off the engine and jumped out of the car. River got out too. It's so quiet, Arya said softly. Arya and River were surrounded by fir trees. They were all covered in snow. It's so beautiful here, River said. Arya walked up to the ranch and knocked on the door. There was a sound of footsteps on the wooden floor, and then the door opened. Arya, my dear, is that really you? It's been a long time. He was a tall man, and he was smoking a pipe. He spoke with a lovely gravelly voice. Hey, Aiko. It's good to see you. It has been a while, hasn't it? Arya said with a smile. Paradise flew down and landed on the wooden veranda. This is Paradise, Arya said. Aiko clocked Paradise and then he turned to Arya and just looked at her quietly for a moment. He smiled. Aiko wore pale blue jeans with a few tasteful rips in them and an old leather belt with a brass buckle. His jumper was a lovely thick knitted wool in dark green, just like the forest. His hair was wonderfully wild and grey. It was long and tied back in a very tidy ponytail. His skin was a golden tan and full of beautiful leathery storylines. Arya wasn't sure how old he was, because there was something so incredibly youthful about him at the same time. As Aiko smoked on his pipe, his green eyes glistened through the smoky haze. Arya broke the silence and turned around and said, This is my friend River. River came over to say hello and held out his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you finally, Aiko. I've heard a lot about you, River said. Thank you, Aiko said, as he shook River's hand firmly and watched him intensely while he puffed on his pipe some more. You still got your sunshine, I see, Aiko said as he took a few steps out of the ranch to inspect Arya's little yellow car. I do, Arya said with a grin as she looked at Orby. Old-fashioned ways to pass the time, like fresh air and sunshine, are hard to beat, Aiko said. His eyes sparkled some more as he delighted in the presence of this unexpected company. I've run out of firewood at the beach house. Do you think I could get some logs for the winter? Arya asked. Aiko pointed to the shed that was next to the ranch, and as he did, his jumper rolled up a bit, and he had tattoos of stars going from his hand along his arm. You know the way, Arya, Aiko said. Aiko was a man of few words, but when he spoke he always had a way of saying things that made them seem of great importance and profound. Aria reached inside the car and got out a basket of vegetables, some homemade strawberry jam, and her homemade mango and chili chutney. "This is for you," Aria said as she carried the basket over to the front door so Aiko didn't have to lift it. "The greatest gift one can give to another is time. Being together," Aiko said, as his eyes met Aria's. It had been a while since Aria had visited, and she was feeling a little guilty about it. "But thank you. That does look good," Aiko said graciously and with a smile as he read her face. "Don't get cold now. Take what you need," Aiko said as he walked back inside the ranch and closed the door. Aria and River walked over to the shed. Aria unlocked the latch and pulled open the large door. The shed was stacked full of logs. "Oh, this is great," River said excitedly. There was a wheelbarrow resting on the side, and Aria and River set to work, loading up the logs onto Orby's roof. They wrapped them up in a thick ground sheet and tied it all up safely. Aria looked at Orby with this big sack of logs on his roof and laughed. "Orby looks like a giant present," Aria said. "Yes, he does," River agreed. "There's a pretty lake somewhere up there in the forest," Aria said, pointing to what had been a path, but it was now all covered in snow. "Sounds good. Shall we go for a walk?" River said. "Yes," Aria said. Aria and River closed up the shed and set off among the snowy trees. Every now and then there was a thud sound as snow would topple off the branches from the trees, falling to the ground. Paradise flew low between the branches as they went. A robin had noticed them on their journey and decided to join them. Aria watched it fly from tree to tree. Sometimes it would land in the middle of the path and wait for Aria to catch up with it, and then it would find a new place to land. Its chest was all beautifully puffed up and red. River was so busy watching Paradise that he hadn't noticed Aria had stopped walking, and he walked right into her. "Whoa," River started to say. "Be quiet," Aria said softly. "Look," Aria said as she pointed ahead. There were two very long white fluffy ears just up ahead of them. "It's a hare," Aria said. The hare didn't stay still for long and gracefully hopped with sophisticated elegance further into the forest. "They look lovely in the snow, don't they?" River said. "Yes, they do," Aria replied. Because of the snow, it wasn't easy to follow any kind of path, so even though Aria knew the way, she had perhaps gone a little off course. "So, where's the lake?" River asked, a little curious and slightly amused. "Well, I thought it was somewhere down here," Aria said. "Is that another way of saying we are lost?" River said, trying not to laugh. Aria didn't want to answer that, as she was determined to work out where she was. They stopped for a moment, and Aria looked around, trying to work out her bearings. As they stood there, Paradise flew into the tree that Aria was standing under, and landed on a very snowy branch. The branch swayed and snow came toppling down onto Aria's head. "Whoa," Aria said as she leapt to one side. As she looked up, Paradise looked down at Aria and made a beep-beep noise. Aria laughed. River laughed too. "Rather you than me," River said. Aria bent down and quickly made a snowball and threw it at River. He moved just in time, so it missed him. River grinned with delight. "Game on," River said. Aria laughed and realized she was in for it now and thought it best to run. River made a big powdery snowball and threw it at Aria as she ran. The two of them constantly dodging and throwing snowballs at each other and laughing as they went. The snow was getting quite deep now, and Aria stopped as she noticed some animal tracks. As Aria bent down to look at them, she had momentarily forgotten about River and their snowball fight. A snowball flew right over her head, just missing her. She turned to look at River, who giggled and held his hands out and said, "Okay, peace." Arya laughed as she had a proper look at the tracks. River came over to see what Arya was looking at. "What are they?" River asked. Arya looked up and said, "Let's go this way," and she set off in the direction of the prince. As they walked, the trees parted, and there, in a beautiful little clearing surrounded by this snowy forest, was a lake. The lake was perfectly round, and it had frozen over. "Wow," River said as he stepped his foot onto the surface to check the thickness of the ice. "Solid," River said as he walked onto it and attempted to dance and slide. He slipped and almost fell over, causing his legs to move all over the place like when a newborn deer is learning to walk. Arya got the giggles. "It's okay, I've got this," River said, a little out of breath, but laughing all the same. River made it to the middle of the lake and called out, "Arya, come on, it's fun." Arya wasn't listening. She was watching the trees and looking at the snow. Arya was just about to walk onto the lake when she noticed some more animal footprints. She decided to follow them. They looked clear and recent. She was close. The prince led her deeper into the forest. There were 2 trees that were much closer together than the other ones. Arya followed the tracks between these 2 trees and stooped under the heavily laden branches. As she walked through the gap and was able to stand up properly, she looked and just watched the quiet for a moment. As she scanned the trees for movement, she saw something shift in the corner of her eye. The world around her was drenched in the monochrome of winter. Right there, in the forest, were 2 wild eyes staring back at her, gold among the grey, soft yet strong. The eyes were intense, reading, watching, like golden lights sparkling through winter's clasp. Grey blended perfectly with grey. These were the eyes of the day and the night, the sun and the moon, the eyes of truth and loyalty, of survival and strength. It was a wolf. Its focus rested gently on Arya. Its amber eyes spoke decibels as they glistened in the light. There was no place for fear in this moment, a humbling and privileged alignment of honour and respect. The golden lights looked up to the sky, and as they did so, there came a mesmerising and defining howl. The wolf did this 3 times in a row. The call of the wild, the sound of freedom and tribe. The wolf looked back at Arya one last time. Arya took a deep breath and thanked the unity of the present. She slowly bowed her head in gratitude and closed her eyes. As she opened them, time had passed, and what was had now gone. But she did not feel alone. Arya smiled as she turned back towards the lake. River called out as Arya was walking towards him, "Did you hear the wolf?" "Yes," Arya said. "I think it might snow again," River said. He was looking a little cold. "Come on, let's get you back to Orby," River said as he looked at Arya. Though Arya was strong, there were times when she also seemed so fragile. River reached out and held Arya's hand for a moment. "This way," Arya said as she pointed to the forest. "Are you sure about that?" River said, grinning. Arya laughed. The sky was getting darker and heavier, but the snow provided so much more light than normal in the thick of the forest. Arya pulled her coat tightly around her as she hugged into its warmth. The forest was quiet. The birds were quiet. "No noise," River said as he looked around. Arya and River walked back up through the trees. Arya knew the way this time, so it didn't take too long to get back. As they walked, there were lots of little footprints in the snow from other animals in the forest. The robin appeared now and then as if it were fulfilling its duty of guiding them through the trees. Neither of them spoke as they headed back to the ranch. There were 2 lanterns very similar to Arya's hanging on the corners of the veranda. They looked so pretty, illuminating the snow on this wintry afternoon. Paradise was waiting patiently on Orby's roof on top of all the logs. Arya noticed something resting on the bonnet. As she got a little closer, she saw what they were. "Tabla," Arya said. "I love these. Iko makes them," Arya said excitedly as she picked up the 2 drums one by one and studied them. There was a note from Iko. It said, "Listen to the sound. The rhythm is the light. Shine bright." "These are very unique, aren't they?" River said as he was interested to see how they were made. They had etchings of trees carved into a fine layer of silver surrounding each drum. Arya turned to look at the ranch, and there, standing in the window, smoking his pipe, was Iko. Arya called out, "I love them!" It was difficult to see because of the light, but Arya knew Iko heard her, as he waved and disappeared into a cloud, puffing away on his pipe. Arya put the tabla safely on the back seat and jumped into the car. River got in too. They set off back down the snowy forest track, Paradise flying along as they went. Orby was good on snow days, and had a way of making them even more fun. As they neared the bottom of the forest track, the trees cleared and there was quite a view of the sea and the beach house. On the horizon, there was a small gap in the clouds, and there, for just a moment, the sunset shone out through the clouds and onto the sea and the snow. It was as though someone had sprinkled the world with glitter, and everything sparkled pink and silver in the light. Arya, River, Paradise and Orby soon arrived back at the beach house. Paradise swooped down into the spiky tree garden. He was delighted to be home. There was a little shelter by the beach house, so Arya decided to stack the logs there to keep them dry. River took some inside and filled up the log baskets, cleared up the fireplace, and started to make a fire. By the time Arya came inside, River had got the fire burning nicely. "Oh, that's so lovely, River. Thank you," Arya said as she crouched down to warm her hands. "Oh, I forgot," Arya said almost immediately, and she leapt up and ran back outside to Orby. She got out her new tabla and came running back inside. River started to hum a tune, and Arya began to bring a rhythm to his sound, all thanks to Iko. It was warmer now in the beach house, so River took off his jacket and moved to the sofa. As he leant onto the blankets, he felt something hard. On further investigation, he realised it was Harold, who was still nestled in there from breakfast time, and he had gone to sleep. "I didn't expect to find you in there," River said to Harold as he picked him up and moved him and the rug to the floor by the fire. "He's keeping warm," Arya said lovingly. Paradise flew in from the spiky tree garden and landed on the mantelpiece by the fireplace. "You look like a beautiful ornament," Arya said as she gazed at him. "I made soup yesterday. Would you like some?" Arya said to River. "Yes, please. That would be lovely," River replied. Arya went into the kitchen and put a pot on the stove and started to heat up some food. As she looked out at her spiky tree garden, the icicles glistened and sparkled all around the windows. While Arya was organising the soup, she put some date and cranberry scones with orange zest in the oven too. It was lovely and cosy inside the beach house. The windowsills were full of little plant pots. Some had new shoots already starting to grow. River inspected them all. There was a little wooden table next to the sofa that had a carving of a lodge and some trees etched into the top of it, very similar to the forest where Iko lived. The food was ready. Arya got out 2 bowls and took the soup over to the table. "It's sweet potato, lemongrass, coconut and chili," Arya said. "Perfect," River said. Arya put the baked scones with some cream and various jams to choose from on the table too. It was almost dark outside already, but the snow still managed to illuminate the night. Arya and River sank into the sofa by the warmth of the log fire and enjoyed what they had to eat. The beach house was filled with all these lovely fragrances, and the log fire crackled and glowed like an old friend. "I've never seen a wolf before," River said as he finished his second scone. Arya was quiet, but attentive. "The sound went right through me today," River continued. "It's a powerful sound, isn't it?" Arya said. "Yes, it is," River said. "The sound of freedom," Arya said. "It really is," River said. As Arya turned to look out of the window, there was a little gap in the clouds over the sea, and the stars sparkled. "I love the stars," Arya said. River turned to look at them too. "They feel like home," River said. "The universe is your home," Arya said. "I love that," River said quietly. "I do too," Arya said. There was a picture on the wall above the fireplace. River hadn't noticed it before. He got up to look a little closer. It was an old tapestry of spiky trees and flowers by the sea. The scene looked very similar to Arya's garden. "Is this?" River said, and then he stopped and thought. "It is," Arya said. "My grandmother made it," Arya explained. "So, it's from a long time ago?" River asked. "I suppose so," Arya said. "Look at this," River said, pointing to the details. There were hummingbirds and beautiful butterflies. In the distance there was a mountain and a waterfall. To the side, sitting on a droopy palm leaf, was a parrot with wings of scarlet, blue and green. Arya smiled as she watched River taking it all in. "Your grandmother really lived her life to the full, didn't she?" River said as he turned to look at Arya. "Yes. Life needs to grow, to shift, to learn, but sometimes it feels stuck, and then you don't progress," Arya said. "I know that feeling," River said. "To really live your dreams," Arya paused, "you have to move forwards in life, or you will be nothing more than a broken record that gets stuck in the same place each time," Arya said as she stood up and looked to the sea. "Life was not built for that. Life is to be lived. Life needs to grow, to learn, to know when to walk away, even if it hurts, to forgive, to let go, to nurture, to give space to breathe, to come alongside, to know when to break through your fears and to realize that they are just fears, and once those fears are removed, to realize that the only person standing in the way is yourself, and that actually you can fly, because you can." Arya felt a tear fall down her cheek and she quickly wiped it away. River's eyes were fixed on Arya as he listened to every word she said. "She believed in me, and that means everything," Arya said. There was a silent pause. "Well, that was quite a speech you just came out with, Arya," River said as he took a deep breath and slowly started to smile. Arya felt a little awkward all of a sudden and laughed. "Love defined," River said. Arya looked down at her hands and was quiet. "Thank you, Arya," River said. "What for?" Arya asked. River said nothing and smiled as he continued to stoke the fire. Paradise was nibbling on some nuts by the windowsill and dropped a couple of them. Harold just so happened to be perfectly in alignment at this moment, and they landed on his shell and bounced off, making a funny noise. Arya and River laughed. "You see, River," Arya said slowly, as she stroked Paradise's scarlet feathers, "you can't choose your family, but you can choose your tribe." As Arya finished what she was saying, it gently started to snow. River held Arya's hand and they walked to the door to the spiky tree garden. River opened the door and they watched the giant snowflakes falling silently all around. The air was freezing cold, yet so wonderfully pure. Each inhale and exhale made you feel brand new. As they watched the beach house jungle become more and more enveloped by this winter wonderland, the snow sparkled and glittered as it caught the light. River was just about to go back inside when there was a powerful and wild howl from somewhere in the distance. "Something about tribe," River said, smiling. Arya grinned. "Something about freedom," Arya said. River stepped out into the snow and made his own howl in answer to the wolf. Arya did too. "Always be wild," Arya said as she spun around in the snowflakes. "Always," River said as he watched Arya spin. Arya looked over and could see a large mound of white snow that vaguely resembled the shape of her car. "Night-night, Orby. You look beautiful," Arya said quietly as she went back inside the beach house. Arya and River settled back on the sofa by the light of the fire. Paradise was still sitting on the windowsill, quietly watching it all. The snow continued to fall, and the beach house glowed by the light of the candles and the cosy log fire. Flip and Flop and Harold had fallen fast asleep on a rug next to the fireplace, and all was quiet except for the sound of the sea at the beach house.